In October 2024, Vladimir Putin made a chilling announcement that sent shockwaves through intelligence agencies worldwide. He confirmed that Russia's automated nuclear retaliation system, known as Dead Hand, has received significant upgrades and remains fully operational in 2025. This system, originally called Perimeter, was designed to automatically launch nuclear weapons without human intervention if Russia's leadership is destroyed. Soviet engineer Vitaly Katayev confirmed in 1993 that Dead Hand remained operational after the Cold War, and recent reports from Wired and Business Insider detail ongoing modernization efforts. While the world focuses on the war in Ukraine, this automated system continues operating in the shadows, controlling access to Russia's nuclear arsenal of over 4,300 warheads. The question isn't whether this doomsday machine exists, but how today's nuclear threats have evolved beyond what Cold War strategists ever imagined. The birth of nuclear paranoia. Understanding this evolution requires examining how nuclear warfare transformed military thinking during the Cold War. Modern intercontinental ballistic missiles like Russia's Sarmat carry up to 10 nuclear warheads with yields thousands of times greater than the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined. These weapons can independently target different cities within minutes of launch, representing destructive power that dwarfs anything Cold War leaders originally contemplated. The nuclear arms race created a puzzle that kept military planners awake at night. Building thousands of nuclear weapons meant nothing if enemy forces could eliminate your leadership before you could order retaliation. Both American and Soviet strategists understood that nuclear war would likely begin with attempts to destroy command centers, communication networks, and political leadership. The aggressor would target Washington, D.C., or Moscow first, hoping to paralyze the enemy's ability to respond. This strategy became known as a decapitation strike, and it represented the most efficient path to nuclear victory. However, this created an impossible mathematical problem for defenders. How do you guarantee nuclear retaliation when the people authorized to order that retaliation might be vaporized in the opening minutes of war? The breakthrough moment came during war games conducted by both superpowers in the late 1970s. American RAND Corporation analysts and Soviet military scientists reached similar conclusions about missile flight times. Submarine-launched ballistic missiles could reach targets in approximately 30 minutes, while land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles provided only 12 to 15 minutes from launch detection to impact. These exercises revealed that modern nuclear weapons had compressed decision-making windows far beyond human capabilities. Traditional military command structures required authorization from multiple levels of leadership, verification procedures, and complex communication protocols. These safeguards, designed to prevent accidental war, became liabilities when measured against incoming missile flight times. Early nuclear command systems reflected Cold War paranoia about maintaining absolute control over nuclear weapons. American presidents carried the nuclear football, a briefcase containing authentication codes and strike options, wherever they traveled. Soviet leaders maintained similar portable command systems linked to underground communication centers beneath Moscow. Both nations built elaborate bunkers designed to protect leadership during nuclear attacks, complete with independent communication networks and years of supplies. These systems assumed that human leaders would survive long enough to make rational decisions about nuclear retaliation. Military planners focused on hardening communication links and creating redundant command centers rather than questioning whether human control itself represented a fundamental weakness. The vulnerability became clear during crisis simulations when communication systems failed under stress. Nuclear command networks relied on telephone lines, radio transmissions, and early satellite systems that proved fragile during testing. Enemy nuclear weapons could destroy communication infrastructure with electromagnetic pulses generated by high-altitude detonations. A single nuclear explosion 200 miles above the United States could disable electronic systems across the entire continent, severing connections between political leadership and military forces. Soviet planners faced identical vulnerabilities, with their communication networks concentrated around Moscow and other major cities that would be primary targets. Military exercises repeatedly demonstrated that nuclear attacks could isolate leaders from their own forces within minutes. The psychological burden of nuclear decision-making became evident during real crises. The 1995 Norwegian rocket incident revealed how quickly situations could spiral toward nuclear war. Russian radar operators detected what appeared to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile approaching from the Norwegian Sea. President Yeltsin activated his nuclear briefcase and gathered advisors to consider immediate retaliation before determining the contact was actually a scientific rocket launch. The incident demonstrated that even experienced leaders struggled to process nuclear threats within the compressed time frames modern weapons demanded. Military leaders reported feeling physically ill when contemplating nuclear decision-making under extreme time pressure, understanding that normal human judgment becomes impossible when facing potential nuclear attacks. Crisis moments revealed how human psychology conflicts with nuclear strategy requirements. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, President Kennedy struggled with conflicting advice from military advisors while Soviet ships approached the quarantine line. Military leaders demanded immediate action while diplomatic advisors urged restraint, creating decision-making paralysis that consumed precious time. These incidents demonstrated that even experienced leaders could not process nuclear threats quickly enough to guarantee effective responses. The requirement for human authorization became viewed as a vulnerability that sophisticated opponents could exploit. Military strategists began questioning whether human involvement in nuclear retaliation represented a fatal weakness rather than a safeguard. Computer analysis showed that human emotions, confusion, and decision-making delays could provide enough time for enemies to complete successful first strikes. Soviet military theorists published papers arguing that nuclear deterrence only worked if retaliation was absolutely guaranteed, regardless of leadership survival. American defense intellectuals reached similar conclusions, noting that uncertainty about retaliation capability might encourage enemy first strikes during severe international crises. The solution emerged from the darkest corners of military planning departments in both nations. If human decision-making was too slow and unreliable for nuclear warfare, perhaps humans should be removed from the process entirely. Computer systems could monitor for nuclear attacks, assess threats, and authorize retaliation faster than any human leader. Automated systems would not hesitate, panic, or fall victim to the psychological pressures that paralyzed human decision-makers. Most importantly, automated nuclear response systems would guarantee retaliation even if every government leader was killed in the opening moments of nuclear war. This concept represented the ultimate evolution of nuclear strategy, transforming weapons of mass destruction into autonomous systems capable of ending human civilization without human involvement. By the mid-1980s, one superpower was ready to cross a line that no nation had ever dared to cross before. When machines take control, the Soviet Union activated the perimeter system in 1985, creating humanity's first automated nuclear command and control mechanism. This system represented the ultimate solution to the nuclear retaliation problem by removing human hesitation from the equation entirely. Soviet engineers had designed civilization's most dangerous insurance policy, ensuring that nuclear aggression against their country would trigger automatic retaliation, even if every Soviet leader lay dead in the ruins of Moscow. The perimeter system operates from a hardened underground command post buried deep beneath Kosvinsky Cayman Mountain in the northern Urals. This facility was designed to survive direct nuclear strikes and continue operating when surface installations had been reduced to radioactive ash. Inside this subterranean fortress, a team of 3 operators maintains constant vigilance, monitoring banks of computers and communication equipment that connect them to sensors scattered across thousands of miles of Russian territory. The system's sensory network represents one of the most comprehensive monitoring systems ever constructed. Seismic sensors buried throughout the Soviet Union detect ground tremors that would accompany nuclear explosions. Radiation detectors monitor ambient radioactivity levels for sudden spikes that would indicate nuclear detonations. Air pressure sensors measure atmospheric disturbances caused by nuclear blasts. Communication monitoring equipment tracks the status of links between the underground command post and military headquarters in Moscow. These sensors feed continuous streams of data to computers that analyze patterns for signs of nuclear attack. The decision-making process follows a terrifyingly logical sequence that removes human emotion from nuclear retaliation. The system monitors for critical conditions that would indicate the Soviet Union was under nuclear attack. First, seismic sensors must detect nuclear explosions on Soviet soil, confirmed through multiple detection methods to prevent false alarms. Second, the system verifies whether communication links to the General Staff War Room in Moscow remain operational. Third, computers assess whether normal military command structures continue to function. Fourth, the system determines if authorized personnel are still capable of issuing nuclear launch orders through conventional channels. If these checks reveal that nuclear weapons have detonated on Soviet territory while communication with Moscow has been severed, the system concludes that Soviet leadership has been eliminated and begins the retaliation sequence. Deep beneath the Ural Mountains, computers analyze this data stream around the clock in an eerie mechanical vigil. Banks of processors run continuous calculations, comparing sensor readings against programmed thresholds that would indicate nuclear war has begun. The machines operate in climate-controlled chambers, their electronic circuits humming quietly while they process information that could determine humanity's survival. Red indicator lights flash on control panels as data flows through cables connecting the underground facility to sensors across the continent. The operators inside the bunker monitor computer displays showing the status of communication networks, radiation levels, and seismic activity across their territory. They understand that they may be among the last human beings to influence whether nuclear retaliation occurs. When the system determines that conditions warrant nuclear response, it can bypass every normal command structure in the Russian military. Traditional nuclear launch procedures require authorization from the highest levels of government, with multiple verification steps and human confirmations at each stage. The perimeter system eliminates these safeguards in favor of speed and certainty. The computers can transfer launch authority directly to the 3 operators inside the underground bunker, granting low-level military personnel the power to authorize nuclear strikes that could end human civilization. These operators receive instructions to launch the system's most critical component, a specialized signal rocket that will broadcast launch orders across the entire Russian nuclear arsenal. The signal rocket represents perhaps the most ingenious and terrifying element of the entire system. Designated as the 15P011, this missile carries a radio transmitter instead of a nuclear warhead. The rocket launches from a hardened underground silo and follows a ballistic trajectory across the entire territory of Russia, broadcasting encrypted launch codes to every operational nuclear facility in the country. The transmission reaches missile silos housing intercontinental ballistic missiles, nuclear submarine bases, and strategic bomber airfields. Mobile missile launchers receive the signal through radio equipment as the rocket passes overhead. The transmitter was specifically designed to penetrate the electromagnetic interference created by nuclear explosions and enemy jamming systems. The system exists in a state of semi-dormancy that makes it even more unsettling than a fully active automated weapon. During normal peacetime conditions, the perimeter system monitors sensor networks and maintains communication links, but it does not possess the authority to launch nuclear weapons independently. The system requires activation by high-ranking officials during international crises when nuclear threats become credible. This activation process transitions the system from passive monitoring to active readiness, enabling it to authorize nuclear retaliation if its sensors detect incoming attacks. The semi-dormant state was designed to prevent accidental launches during technical malfunctions while ensuring the system could respond immediately when genuinely needed. The activation threshold remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in Russian military doctrine. Intelligence analysts believe the system can be awakened by the Russian president, defense minister, or general staff chief during periods of heightened international tension. Once activated, the system begins monitoring its sensor network with lethal intent, ready to conclude that nuclear war has begun and respond accordingly. The activation decision transforms a monitoring system into an autonomous weapon capable of ending human civilization without further human input. Once the perimeter system receives activation orders and detects nuclear attacks on Russian territory, it becomes the ultimate authority over the country's nuclear arsenal. The system assumes command responsibility that would normally belong to the Russian president or senior military leaders. Computer algorithms replace human judgment in determining whether nuclear retaliation is warranted and which targets should be destroyed. The three operators in the underground bunker become executors of machine decisions rather than independent decision makers. They can launch the signal rocket that will trigger nuclear strikes across multiple continents, potentially killing hundreds of millions of people in response to computer calculations rather than human analysis. The perimeter system represented the final evolution of nuclear strategy, where machines possessed the authority to determine whether human civilization would continue to exist. Yet, the Soviets had created this ultimate deterrent weapon while making a strategic decision that would render it nearly useless. The secret that nearly ended the world. The Soviets had engineered the perfect deterrent and then destroyed its effectiveness through absolute secrecy. Nuclear deterrence functions on a fundamental principle that requires your enemy to know exactly what consequences they face if they attack you. The entire concept of mutually assured destruction depends on both sides understanding the retaliation they would trigger by starting nuclear war. As defense analyst David Hoffman noted, hiding the dead hand system completely negated its deterrent purpose because American leaders could not factor its existence into their strategic calculations. American war planners throughout the 1980s developed nuclear strategies based on fatally incomplete information about Soviet capabilities. Pentagon strategists calculated that rapid decapitation strikes against Soviet command centers could potentially prevent nuclear retaliation by eliminating the leadership needed to authorize missile launches. These calculations assumed that destroying the Kremlin and key military facilities would leave Soviet nuclear forces unable to respond effectively. According to Bruce Blair's 1993 New York Times analysis, American military exercises regularly practiced scenarios designed to remove Soviet decision-makers before they could order retaliation. The entire American nuclear strategy operated under the assumption that Soviet nuclear forces required human authorization to launch. The Americans had no knowledge they were developing first strike scenarios against an opponent possessing an automated doomsday machine. Military planners could not account for a system they did not know existed, creating conditions where American nuclear attacks might inadvertently trigger automatic Soviet retaliation without American leaders understanding they had activated a machine capable of ending human civilization. The system was specifically designed to function even if Soviet leadership was completely eliminated, meaning it could launch nuclear weapons in response to American attacks that were intended to be limited surgical strikes. The Able Archer 83 NATO exercise in November 1983 demonstrated how close this secret system came to activation during routine military operations. NATO forces conducted a realistic simulation of nuclear warfare, complete with coded communications and mock authorization procedures for nuclear weapons. Soviet intelligence services monitored NATO activities and became convinced that the exercise was actually cover for a real American first strike. KGB agents reported unusual activity at American military bases, while Soviet radar stations detected increased NATO aircraft movements. The Soviet military placed nuclear forces on high alert and prepared for immediate retaliation. The dead hand system, operational since 1985, would have been analyzing sensor data for signs of incoming American missiles during this period of maximum tension. Soviet leaders seriously considered the possibility that NATO was using the exercise to mask the opening stages of nuclear war. the Norwegian rocket incident of January 25, 1995, revealed how the secret system continued threatening global security even after the Cold War ended. Russian radar operators detected what appeared to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile approaching from the Atlantic Ocean. The trajectory matched the flight path of a Trident missile launched from an American submarine, suggesting the United States had begun a nuclear-first strike against Russia. President Boris Yeltsin activated his nuclear briefcase and gathered senior military advisors to consider immediate retaliation. The dead hand system, still operational despite the Soviet collapse, would have been monitoring this exact scenario through its sensor networks. Only after tense consultations did Russian officials realize they were tracking a scientific research rocket launched from Norway to study the aurora borealis. These incidents illustrated the dangerous logic of secret automated weapons, where nuclear war could begin without either side understanding what was happening. American presidents throughout the 1980s made nuclear decisions without knowing their actions might trigger an automated response system. The system's secrecy meant that every major Cold War confrontation carried the hidden risk of activating a doomsday machine that American leaders did not know existed. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Berlin Crisis, and dozens of smaller incidents had all occurred while the Soviets possessed a secret system capable of launching nuclear weapons without human authorization. The world learned about the system's existence only after the Soviet Union collapsed, and the information could no longer influence Cold War strategy. In 1993, Vitaly Katayev, a senior advisor to the chairman of the Defense Industry Department of the Central Committee of the Communist Party, confirmed that the dead hand had been definitely operational by the early 1980s. According to Katayev, the system was not completely automatic, but was intended to be activated manually during threatening crises and triggered by numerous sensors sensitive to light, seismic shock, radiation, and atmospheric density. American intelligence agencies realized they had spent the final decade of the Cold War completely unaware that their nuclear strategies could have triggered an automated Soviet response. Western analysts experienced genuine shock when they understood how close the world had come to accidental nuclear war during routine military exercises and international crises. The revelation meant that every major Cold War confrontation had carried the hidden risk of triggering an automated doomsday machine that American leaders did not know existed. The Americans had been playing a game where they did not know all the rules, and the missing information could have ended human civilization. The secret had protected Soviet strategic interests during the Cold War, but it had also created conditions where nuclear war could have begun through misunderstanding and miscalculation rather than deliberate aggression. The system's existence remained buried in classified Soviet archives until 1990s, when former officials began revealing details about Cold War nuclear programs. The delayed disclosure meant that the most dangerous automated weapon in human history had operated in complete secrecy for over a decade, creating risks that neither superpower fully understood. Yet this Cold War relic would not remain a historical curiosity. Decades later, a new Russian leader would resurrect the system with capabilities that would make its Soviet nuclear resurrection seem primitive. Vladimir Putin stood before cameras in October 2024 and delivered news that made intelligence analysts around the world reach for secure phones. Russia's automated nuclear response system had received substantial modernization and remained fully operational with enhanced capabilities. Western governments had assumed the dead hand system might have been quietly retired after the Cold War ended, relegated to museums alongside other Soviet-era military hardware. Putin's announcement shattered those assumptions and confirmed that Russia had not only maintained its doomsday machine, but had spent decades improving it with 21st century technology. The revelation sent classified briefings racing through NATO headquarters and prompted emergency meetings in Washington about implications for global nuclear stability. Colonel General Sergei Karakiv, commander of Russia's strategic rocket forces, provided crucial details in December 2024 when he confirmed that upgrades to the system had continued over 2 decades of modernization efforts. This represented the most specific official acknowledgement of the system's ongoing development since Kharkiv's 2011 confirmation that Dead Hand remained continuously operational. However, Russian officials have provided virtually no public details about the specific nature of these upgrades, leaving Western intelligence agencies to piece together capabilities from fragmentary evidence and technical analysis. Russia has transformed Dead Hand from a Cold War relic into a modern nuclear command system integrated with the most advanced weapons ever constructed. The system now oversees a nuclear arsenal that dwarfs what the Soviet Union possessed during the height of the Cold War. Intelligence assessments indicate that Russia maintains approximately 5,459 nuclear warheads as of 2025, making it the largest nuclear stockpile on Earth. This includes around 1,718 strategic warheads deployed on operational delivery systems, with the remainder held in storage or awaiting dismantlement. The deployed warheads are distributed across land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine-launched ballistic missiles, and strategic bomber aircraft, creating a nuclear triad that the automated system must coordinate. The modernization program has created a system that intelligence agencies struggle to fully understand. Satellite imagery shows construction activity at facilities associated with the Dead Hand network, including new communication towers and upgraded bunker entrances. Russian military contractors have received substantial contracts for electronic systems integration and advanced sensor networks. The upgrades likely include quantum-encrypted communication systems that would be nearly impossible for enemies to intercept or jam. Advanced seismic sensors can distinguish between natural earthquakes and underground nuclear explosions with unprecedented precision. The system probably incorporates sophisticated algorithms that analyze patterns in global military activity to predict potential threats. Dead Hand now controls weapons systems that didn't exist when Soviet engineers first activated the system in 1985. The Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, operational since 2023, carries up to 10 independently targetable nuclear warheads and can reach any location on Earth within 30 minutes. The system likely coordinates with Poseidon nuclear-powered underwater drones designed to create radioactive tsunamis along enemy coastlines. Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missiles with virtually unlimited range fall under the system's potential authority. Kinzhal hypersonic missiles mounted on MiG-31 interceptors can deliver nuclear warheads to targets within 2,000 kilometers at speeds exceeding Mach 10. Avangard hypersonic glide vehicles travel at Mach 20 and can maneuver unpredictably during their terminal approach to targets. The integration of hypersonic weapons creates unprecedented challenges for enemy defense systems and nuclear command structures. Traditional ballistic missiles follow predictable parabolic trajectories that allow radar systems to calculate impact points and provide warning times measured in tens of minutes. Hypersonic weapons can change course during flight and approach targets from unexpected directions at speeds that compress reaction times to mere minutes. If Dead Hand controls these systems, it could authorize nuclear strikes that arrive faster than enemy leaders can process the threat and respond. The system could potentially launch hypersonic nuclear weapons that reach Washington, D.C. or major NATO military facilities before traditional early warning systems can provide adequate notice to political leadership. The war in Ukraine has fundamentally altered Russia's nuclear posture and the operational status of its automated systems. Russian military doctrine traditionally distinguished between strategic nuclear weapons designed for global warfare and tactical nuclear weapons intended for regional conflicts. The Ukrainian conflict has blurred these distinctions as Russia faces NATO weapon systems on its border and precision strikes against targets inside Russian territory. Putin has repeatedly referenced Russia's nuclear capabilities during speeches about the war, suggesting that the threshold for nuclear weapons use may have been lowered from previous decades. The Dead Hand system may have been reconfigured to respond to conventional attacks on critical Russian infrastructure rather than limiting its activation to strategic nuclear threats. Intelligence analysts have detected changes in Russian nuclear force readiness levels that suggest the automated system may be operating under modified parameters. Russian strategic rocket forces have conducted an unusual number of exercises since the war began, testing launch procedures and communication systems. Nuclear submarine patrols have increased in frequency and duration. Mobile missile launchers have been photographed in new deployment areas closer to the Ukrainian border. These movements could indicate that Russia has placed its nuclear forces on higher alert status, which would necessarily involve adjustments to the dead hand system's threat assessment algorithms. Current intelligence assessments paint a disturbing picture of the system's operational readiness and expanded authorities. Signals intelligence suggests that communication networks connecting the underground command bunker to Russian nuclear forces have been substantially upgraded with new encryption systems and backup communication paths. Satellite imagery shows increased activity at facilities associated with the Dead Hand network, including new construction projects and expanded personnel housing. Electronic intelligence indicates that Russian nuclear forces regularly test communication procedures that could be associated with automated launch authorization systems. The system now operates with technological capabilities that would have seemed impossible to its original Soviet designers. Modern sensors, communication networks, and processing power have transformed Dead Hand into something far more sophisticated than the mechanical Doomsday machine activated in 1985. The technology of Armageddon, artificial intelligence systems, now drive the decision-making processes that would have required human analysis teams during the Cold War. Modern computer processors analyze sensor data streams at speeds measured in teraflops, processing information about potential nuclear threats faster than human brains can comprehend individual data points. Machine learning algorithms have replaced the simple threshold-based systems that originally determined whether nuclear attacks were underway. Neural networks trained on decades of sensor data can identify patterns associated with nuclear weapons deployment, missile launches, and electromagnetic signatures that indicate incoming warheads. The system now interprets complex threat scenarios using artificial intelligence rather than simply reacting to predetermined triggers. The speed improvements create a system that can detect and respond to nuclear threats in timeframes that compress human decision-making to irrelevance. Modern Dead Hand processes satellite imagery, radar returns, seismic data, and communication intercepts simultaneously while cross-referencing this information against databases containing signatures of every known nuclear weapon system on Earth. The artificial intelligence components complete threat assessments that would have required hours of human analysis during the Cold War in seconds or minutes. Quantum computing elements may allow the system to run multiple scenario analyses simultaneously, calculating the probability that detected activities represent genuine nuclear attacks rather than exercises, equipment tests, or natural phenomena. A constellation of sensors feeds continuous information streams into the upgraded system through communication networks that span the globe. The Tundra early warning satellites in highly elliptical orbits monitor heat signatures from rocket launches anywhere on Earth, detecting the infrared emissions produced by intercontinental ballistic missile engines during their boost phase. Voronezh-class radars positioned across Russia's borders track objects in space and provide precise trajectory calculations for incoming warheads. Underground seismic monitoring stations detect nuclear explosions anywhere in the world within minutes of detonation. Atmospheric radiation sensors measure changes in background radioactivity that would accompany nuclear weapons use. Ocean-based hydroacoustic sensors listen for underwater nuclear explosions that might indicate submarine-launched ballistic missile attacks. The system processes massive quantities of threat data continuously, analyzing information flows that would overwhelm human intelligence. Analysts, every day, Dead Hand receives thousands of radar contacts from aircraft movements, satellite observations of military facilities, seismic readings from around the world, and intercepted communications from foreign military forces. Machine learning algorithms sort through this information to identify patterns that might indicate nuclear weapons deployment or launch preparations. The artificial intelligence components maintain baseline profiles of normal military activity for every nuclear-armed nation and flag deviations that could suggest hostile intentions. Advanced pattern recognition software can detect subtle changes in military communications that might indicate nuclear forces have been placed on higher alert status. Machine learning algorithms now help Dead Hand distinguish between legitimate nuclear threats and false alarms that previously plagued automated warning systems. The artificial intelligence has been trained on historical data from nuclear weapons tests, military exercises, and natural events that could trigger false positives. Neural networks can differentiate between the seismic signatures of underground nuclear explosions and natural earthquakes by analyzing the frequency patterns and energy distribution of ground vibrations. Satellite monitoring systems use machine learning to distinguish between the heat signatures of intercontinental ballistic missile launches and civilian space missions. Advanced signal processing algorithms can identify the electromagnetic characteristics of nuclear weapons detonations while filtering out interference from solar storms and electronic warfare systems. Integration with Russia's newest early warning systems has created a comprehensive threat detection network that monitors potential nuclear attacks from multiple domains simultaneously. The system coordinates information from ground-based radars, space-based sensors, and submarine detection networks to build complete pictures of potential threats. Advanced data fusion algorithms combine inputs from different sensor types to confirm or reject threat assessments with higher confidence than any single detection method could provide. The integration allows Dead Hand to track hypersonic weapons that might evade traditional radar systems by correlating space-based infrared detection with ground-based electronic intelligence gathering. Dead Hand can now coordinate directly with mobile missile launchers and submarine forces through encrypted communication networks that bypass traditional military command structures. The system maintains real-time data links with Road Mobile Topol-M and YAR's intercontinental ballistic missile systems that can receive launch authorization codes while moving through remote areas of Siberia. Satellite communication systems connect the underground command bunker with nuclear submarines operating beneath Arctic ice or in deep ocean patrol areas. The coordination capabilities allow Dead Hand to authorize nuclear strikes using weapons platforms that might be impossible for enemies to locate and destroy in first strike scenarios. The artificial intelligence improvements create the disturbing possibility that Dead Hand has become more likely to activate than its original designers intended. Modern machine learning systems can identify threats with greater sensitivity than threshold-based systems, potentially triggering nuclear responses to military activities that earlier versions would have ignored. The artificial intelligence might interpret normal military exercises as preparation for nuclear attack if the patterns match threat profiles in its training data. Advanced pattern recognition could cause the system to identify hostile intentions based on subtle indicators that human analysts would dismiss as routine activities. The system's ability to operate independently of human oversight represents perhaps the most concerning aspect of the technological upgrades. Artificial intelligence components can now make complex judgments about nuclear threats without requiring human confirmation or review. The machine learning algorithms operate continuously, analyzing global military activities and updating threat assessments without human operators necessarily understanding how the artificial intelligence reached its conclusions. The independence from human control means that Dead Hand could potentially authorize nuclear retaliation based on artificial intelligence assessments that humans might dispute if they had the opportunity to review the evidence. These technological advances have created capabilities that extend far beyond Russia's borders, forcing other nuclear powers to confront fundamental questions about the future of nuclear command and control systems in an age of artificial intelligence and hypersonic weapons. America's dilemma. Pentagon strategists now face a terrifying reality that keeps senior defense officials awake at night. The United States is seriously considering building its own version of Dead Hand, an automated nuclear response system that could authorize the end of human civilization without human approval. This consideration represents one of the most dramatic shifts in American nuclear policy since the Manhattan Project. driven by technological developments that have fundamentally altered the mathematics of nuclear warfare. American military planners have reached the same conclusion that Soviet engineers reached in the 1980s. Human decision-making may be too slow to guarantee nuclear retaliation in modern warfare. Hypersonic weapons have compressed nuclear decision-making timelines from the already challenging 15-minute windows of the Cold War to timeframes measured in mere minutes. Traditional intercontinental ballistic missiles follow predictable parabolic trajectories that allow radar systems to track their progress and calculate impact times with reasonable accuracy. Hypersonic missiles operate under completely different physics, traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 5 while maneuvering unpredictably during flight. These weapons can change course multiple times during their approach to targets, making it nearly impossible for defense systems to predict where they will strike. The combination of extreme speed and unpredictable flight paths has created a new category of nuclear threat that existing American command systems were never designed to address. Chinese and Russian hypersonic missiles can reach American targets faster than the human brain can process the implications of their launch. China's DFZF hypersonic glide vehicle travels at Mach 10, covering approximately 7,673 miles per hour during its terminal approach phase. This speed allows the weapon to cross the Pacific Ocean and strike targets on the American West Coast within approximately 20 minutes of launch detection. Russia's Avangard hypersonic system travels at similar speeds and can maneuver during flight to avoid missile defense systems. Both weapons represent a technological leap that has fundamentally altered nuclear warfare calculations. American early warning systems might detect these weapons during their boost phase, but the compressed flight times leave virtually no time for human leaders to process threat information, consult advisors, and authorize appropriate responses. America's current nuclear command systems remain dangerously vulnerable to decapitation strikes that could eliminate presidential authority within minutes of enemy attack. The American nuclear command structure depends on the president's ability to receive threat assessments, evaluate response options, and communicate launch orders to military commanders scattered across the globe. This process requires functioning communication networks, surviving command centers, and enough time for human decision-makers to understand what is happening and respond appropriately. Hypersonic weapons could destroy the White House, Pentagon, and other critical command facilities before the president fully comprehends that nuclear war has begun. The compressed timelines mean that traditional safeguards designed to prevent accidental nuclear war have become liabilities that could prevent any nuclear response at all. The United States is exploring proposals for artificial intelligence-assisted nuclear command and control systems that could process threat data and recommend responses faster than human operators. These systems would analyze inputs from early warning satellites, ground-based radars, and intelligence networks to identify genuine nuclear attacks within seconds of detection. Machine learning algorithms could distinguish between real threats and false alarms more quickly than human analysts, potentially providing critical extra minutes for presidential decision-making. The artificial intelligence components would not replace human authorization for nuclear weapons use, but would accelerate the information processing that supports human decisions. Advanced automated systems could maintain communication networks, coordinate with military units, and prepare nuclear forces for launch while human leaders consider their options. American strategists engage in heated debates about how much automation is appropriate for nuclear weapons systems. Conservative voices argue that human control over nuclear weapons represents a fundamental moral principle that should never be compromised regardless of technological pressures. They warn that automated systems could malfunction or be compromised by enemy cyber attacks, potentially triggering accidental nuclear war. Progressive military thinkers counter that human decision-making has become the weakest link in nuclear deterrence, arguing that enemies could exploit American reluctance to automate nuclear responses. They propose that artificial intelligence systems could actually reduce the risk of nuclear war by making more accurate threat assessments and eliminating human emotions that might lead to poor decisions during crises. Building a system that operates fast enough to matter while remaining safe enough to trust presents extraordinary technical challenges that push the boundaries of computer science and engineering. The system must process enormous quantities of sensor data from around the world while filtering out false alarms that could trigger accidental nuclear war. Advanced encryption protocols must protect the system from cyber attacks while ensuring that legitimate commands can reach nuclear forces even during massive electronic warfare campaigns. The artificial intelligence components require training data that accurately represents genuine nuclear threats without creating systems that are too sensitive to normal military activities. Redundant communication networks must connect the system to nuclear forces while maintaining security against enemy interception or jamming. The moral and ethical questions surrounding automated nuclear weapons challenge fundamental assumptions about human responsibility for life and death decisions. Religious leaders argue that decisions about ending human civilization should always require human judgment and moral consideration. Philosophers debate whether artificial intelligence systems can possess the wisdom necessary to weigh the consequences of nuclear retaliation. Military ethicists worry that automated systems could normalize nuclear weapons use by removing the psychological barriers that make human leaders reluctant to authorize mass destruction. International law experts question whether automated nuclear weapons comply with existing treaties and conventions governing warfare. America stands at the same crossroads that the Soviet Union faced in 1985 when it activated the first automated nuclear response system. American military leaders understand that crossing this line would fundamentally change the nature of nuclear deterrence and global security. The pressure to automate nuclear responses grows stronger each year as hypersonic weapons proliferate and decision-making windows continue to shrink. The estimated cost of America's nuclear modernization program has reached at least $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years, reflecting the scale of technological changes required to maintain nuclear deterrence in the modern era. Military exercises increasingly test scenarios where human leaders have minutes rather than hours to respond to nuclear threats. The technological momentum may ultimately make the decision inevitable regardless of moral concerns or strategic preferences. Yet America's potential entry into automated nuclear warfare represents only the beginning of a far more dangerous transformation taking place when across algorithms nuclear power simultaneously. China has reportedly begun developing artificial intelligence systems for integration into its nuclear command and control infrastructure, following the same logic that drove Soviet engineers to build Dead Hand in the 1980s. The Chinese military understands that hypersonic weapons and compressed decision timelines have made human-controlled nuclear responses increasingly unrealistic. Within the next decade, multiple nuclear powers may operate their own versions of automated nuclear response systems, creating a global network of machines capable of ending human civilization without human oversight. If current development programs continue, the world may soon witness the emergence of multiple automated doomsday machines operating simultaneously across different continents. China's approach to automated nuclear systems reflects its broader military modernization strategy that emphasizes artificial intelligence and advanced computing capabilities. Chinese defense researchers have published papers discussing the integration of machine learning algorithms into early warning systems and threat assessment protocols. The People's Liberation Army has invested billions of dollars in quantum computing research that could support automated nuclear command systems. Chinese military exercises increasingly test scenarios involving rapid nuclear escalation and compressed decision-making timelines. Intelligence assessments suggest that China views automated nuclear responses as essential for maintaining deterrence against American and Russian hypersonic weapons. The development timeline for Chinese automated systems remains classified, but Western analysts believe operational capabilities could emerge within 5 to 10 years. The prospect of multiple dead hand systems operating simultaneously creates dangers that exceed the risks posed by any single automated nuclear system. Different nations would program their systems with varying threat assessment algorithms, activation thresholds, and target selection criteria. Russian systems might interpret Chinese military exercises as preparation for nuclear attack, while Chinese systems could misinterpret American missile defense tests as first strike preparations. The automated systems would operate based on intelligence estimates and threat assessments that might not reflect actual enemy intentions. Each system would monitor global military activities through its own sensor networks and reach independent conclusions about potential nuclear threats. The lack of coordination between automated systems could create situations where one machine's defensive response triggers another machine's offensive retaliation. Machine-to-machine nuclear escalation represents perhaps the most terrifying aspect of automated nuclear warfare. Computer systems could potentially trigger each other in cascading sequences of retaliation that occur faster than human operators can intervene. An automated system detecting incoming missiles might launch nuclear weapons that another automated system interprets as a first strike, requiring immediate response. The retaliation could trigger additional automated responses from third-party systems that view the expanding nuclear exchange as a threat to their own nations. Each automated system would calculate optimal response strategies without considering the broader implications of multiple nuclear powers engaging simultaneously. The mathematical logic that drives automated systems toward nuclear retaliation could create unstoppable escalation cycles that consume entire continents within hours. Cyber warfare introduces vulnerabilities that could allow enemies to compromise or trigger automated nuclear systems through digital attacks rather than physical weapons. Hackers could potentially penetrate command and control systems, introduce malware, or disrupt network connectivity, thereby eroding trust in information and increasing the risk of misperception during international crises. Advanced persistent threats sponsored by nation-states possess capabilities that could target the communication networks connecting automated systems to nuclear forces. Cyber attacks could corrupt sensor data feeding into automated threat assessment algorithms, causing systems to interpret normal activities as nuclear attacks. Malicious software could alter the programming parameters that determine when automated systems authorize nuclear retaliation. The increasing reliance on digital systems in nuclear command and control makes these systems more susceptible to cyber threats that could trigger accidental nuclear war. The nightmare scenario of a global network of automated nuclear weapons operating beyond human control becomes more realistic as additional nations develop these capabilities. France and the United Kingdom may eventually conclude that their nuclear deterrents require automated backup systems to remain credible against hypersonic threats. India and Pakistan could develop automated systems to address the compressed timelines of regional nuclear warfare. Israel might build automated responses to guarantee retaliation against multiple enemies simultaneously. North Korea could pursue automated systems to ensure nuclear retaliation even if the regime collapses during warfare. Each additional automated system would increase the complexity of global nuclear stability calculations and create new pathways for accidental war. Algorithmic warfare at the nuclear level introduces concepts that challenge traditional assumptions about nuclear strategy and crisis management. Automated systems could wage nuclear conflicts using decision-making processes that human strategists cannot fully predict or understand. Machine learning algorithms might identify threat patterns that seem logical to artificial intelligence but would appear incomprehensible to human analysts. The automated systems could develop targeting strategies and escalation preferences that reflect mathematical optimization rather than human strategic thinking. Computer algorithms might conclude that certain types of nuclear attacks provide optimal outcomes according to programmed criteria, leading to nuclear warfare strategies that no human leader would approve. Human control over nuclear weapons faces technological pressures that may ultimately make automation inevitable regardless of policy preferences or moral concerns. Hypersonic weapons continue to compress decision-making timelines below human reaction capabilities. Artificial intelligence systems demonstrate superior performance at processing complex data streams and identifying threat patterns. Military leaders face growing pressure to adopt automated systems that promise strategic advantages over human-controlled alternatives. The technological momentum toward automation may ultimately override ethical considerations about maintaining human control over nuclear weapons. The transformation toward machine-controlled nuclear warfare may have already begun without public recognition of its implications. Existing nuclear powers continue upgrading their command and control systems with artificial intelligence components that operate with increasing independence from human oversight. Military exercises increasingly test automated threat assessment systems and machine-assisted decision-making protocols. Defense budgets allocate enormous resources toward developing faster and more sophisticated nuclear command systems. We may be entering an era where machines make the ultimate decisions about human survival, while humans retain only the illusion of control over their most destructive weapons. The mathematical logic that drives automated nuclear systems toward optimal strategic outcomes may not align with human preferences for survival and civilization. This theoretical framework for algorithmic nuclear warfare has already been tested in real-world conditions, where international tensions and active military conflicts create the exact scenarios that automated systems are designed to address. The Ukraine factor. The war in Ukraine has brought Russia's dead hand system closer to activation than at any point since the Berlin crisis of 1961. Russian nuclear forces have conducted more exercises in 2 years of Ukrainian conflict than during the previous decade combined. Satellite imagery shows increased activity at facilities associated with the automated system, including new personnel rotations and expanded communication infrastructure. Intelligence assessments indicate that Russia has placed its nuclear forces on higher alert levels multiple times since February 2022, which necessarily involves adjustments to the dead hand system's operational parameters. The ongoing conflict has transformed a Cold War relic into a modern threat that monitors every NATO weapon shipment and Ukrainian military operation for signs of escalation that could trigger automatic nuclear retaliation. Putin's nuclear rhetoric during the conflict has repeatedly referenced capabilities that only make sense in the context of automated response systems. His statements about Russia's readiness to use nuclear weapons regardless of leadership survival clearly allude to systems that can function without human authorization. Russian military officials have made unusually specific references to maintaining nuclear deterrence even under conditions of command structure disruption. These statements serve as barely concealed warnings that dead hand remains operational and could authorize nuclear strikes even if NATO forces eliminated Russian political leadership. The messaging strategy relies on enemy knowledge of the automated system to enhance deterrence effects beyond what traditional nuclear threats could achieve. Several critical moments during the war have likely triggered heightened alert status for the automated system. The September 2022 Ukrainian counteroffensive in Kharkiv region prompted Russian officials to declare that attacks on annexed territories would be considered attacks on Russian soil. This declaration occurred simultaneously with increased Russian nuclear force readiness exercises and communication tests that suggest dead hand parameters may have been adjusted. The October 2022 explosion on the Kerch Strait Bridge connecting Russia to Crimea prompted immediate Russian retaliation and statements about escalatory responses to infrastructure attacks. Intelligence analysts believe this incident may have brought the automated system closer to activation than any event since the Norwegian rocket incident of 1995. NATO's increasing military involvement in Ukraine has created exactly the kind of escalation scenarios that Dead Hand was designed to address. The system monitors NATO weapons deliveries, training programs, and intelligence support as potential indicators of direct Western involvement in the conflict. Advanced Western weapon systems striking targets inside Russia could trigger automated threat assessment algorithms that interpret these attacks as preparation for broader NATO military action. The provision of F-16 fighter aircraft, ATACMS missiles, and advanced air defense systems has crossed previous Russian red lines and may have required adjustments to the system's threat recognition parameters. Each escalation in NATO support creates new data points that automated systems must analyze to determine whether Western involvement has reached levels that warrant nuclear response. Russia's nuclear doctrine underwent substantial revision in 2024 specifically to address scenarios emerging from the Ukrainian conflict. The updated doctrine explicitly includes Belarus in nuclear protection guarantees and expands conditions under which Russia might authorize nuclear weapons use. The 2024 doctrine includes the possibility of a Russian nuclear response to a massive launch of air and space attack means and their crossing of state borders. This language suggests a lower threshold for nuclear use compared to previous versions. The doctrinal changes necessarily required corresponding adjustments to automated systems that implement nuclear policy through computer algorithms rather than human decision-making. The integration of tactical nuclear weapons with dead hand represents a fundamental expansion of the system's original strategic mission. Russia has deployed short-range nuclear weapons to Belarus and conducted exercises involving tactical nuclear scenarios in response to Ukrainian military successes. These weapons possess yields measured in kilotons rather than megatons and are designed for battlefield use rather than city destruction. However, their integration with automated response systems means that dead hand could potentially authorize tactical nuclear strikes in response to conventional military defeats or territorial incursions. The system that was originally designed to guarantee strategic nuclear retaliation against homeland attacks may now control weapons intended for regional conflict escalation. Dead hand has become central to Russia's escalation management strategy throughout the Ukrainian conflict. Russian officials have used knowledge of the system's existence to enhance the credibility of nuclear threats by implying that retaliation would occur automatically regardless of Russian leadership survival. This messaging strategy attempts to convince NATO leaders that supporting Ukraine carries unacceptable risks of triggering automated nuclear responses. The system provides Russia with escalation options that do not require direct presidential authorization, potentially allowing nuclear weapons used during scenarios where traditional command structures might hesitate. Intelligence assessments suggest that dead hand parameters have been adjusted to address regional conflict scenarios rather than limiting activation to strategic nuclear attacks against Russian territory. The system may now interpret sustained conventional attacks against Russian infrastructure as indicators of broader Western campaigns designed to degrade Russian military capabilities. Ukrainian drone attacks against strategic bomber bases, oil refineries, and military production facilities could potentially trigger threat assessment algorithms originally designed to detect strategic nuclear strikes. The automated system might conclude that coordinated conventional attacks represent the opening phase of a campaign intended to eliminate Russian nuclear capabilities, thereby justifying preemptive nuclear retaliation according to programmed logic. The possibility that conventional attacks on Russian territory could trigger dead hand represents the most dangerous aspect of the system's evolution during the Ukrainian war. Russian officials have declared that attacks on annexed Ukrainian territories constitute attacks on Russian homeland, potentially expanding the geographical area where automated systems monitor for threats. Long-range Ukrainian missile strikes against targets in traditional Russian territory have prompted Russian statements about escalatory responses and red line violations. The system's sensors and algorithms must now distinguish between routine Ukrainian military operations and attack patterns that indicate preparation for broader Western military action against Russia. The ongoing war has made dead hand more relevant and dangerous than at any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Modern conventional weapons possess precision and destructive capabilities that could potentially trigger automated systems designed during an era of less sophisticated conventional threats. Ukrainian forces supported by NATO intelligence and targeting assistance can strike Russian facilities with accuracy that might appear to automated systems as preparation for strategic attacks. The compressed timelines of modern warfare mean that dead hand might authorize nuclear retaliation against conventional attacks before human operators can assess whether those attacks represent genuine strategic threats or routine military operations. The war has activated a system that was built for global nuclear conflict, but now operates in a regional war where the boundaries between conventional and nuclear warfare have become increasingly blurred. Yet, the system's heightened operational status during active conflict creates conditions where technical failures or misinterpreted data could have catastrophic consequences that extend far beyond the current war. The false alarm nightmare. Technical malfunctions and sensor errors have plagued every automated nuclear system ever constructed, creating scenarios where Dead Hand could potentially authorize nuclear retaliation against threats that exist only in computer memory. The American NORAD system famously displayed a massive Soviet nuclear attack during a 1979 training exercise when technicians accidentally loaded simulation software into the live operational network. Soviet and Russian early warning systems have experienced similar glitches, including incidents where computers interpreted routine satellite launches, military exercises, and natural phenomena as incoming nuclear attacks. Dead Hand operates with sensors and computers that remain vulnerable to the same types of failures that have created false alarms in every nuclear warning system ever built. Modern automated systems face technical vulnerabilities that decades of advancement have not eliminated. Computer processors malfunction due to manufacturing defects, cosmic radiation, or component aging that causes circuits to produce incorrect outputs. Software programs contain bugs and coding errors that can cause systems to reach wrong conclusions based on correct input data. Communication networks experience transmission errors that corrupt data traveling between sensors and central processing units. Electromagnetic interference from solar flares, radio transmissions, or electronic warfare systems can disrupt sensor readings and cause automated systems to detect threats that do not exist. The complexity of modern Dead Hand systems actually increases potential failure points rather than reducing them, creating more opportunities for technical problems to trigger false alarms. Historical incidents demonstrate how easily automated systems misinterpret routine activities as nuclear attacks. In 1983, Soviet Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov prevented nuclear war when he correctly identified a computer-generated report of American missile launches as a false alarm caused by sunlight reflecting off clouds. The Soviet Oko early warning satellite system had mistaken solar reflections for infrared signatures of intercontinental ballistic missile engines during boost phase. Petrov's decision to report the incident as a malfunction rather than genuine attack prevented Soviet nuclear retaliation against the United States. The 1995 Norwegian rocket incident nearly triggered Russian nuclear forces when radar operators detected what appeared to be a submarine-launched ballistic missile approaching from the Atlantic Ocean. The object was actually a scientific research rocket studying Aurora Borealis, but Russian early warning systems could not distinguish between the rocket's trajectory and that of an American Trident missile. Automated systems face impossible challenges when receiving conflicting or corrupted data from multiple sensor networks operating across vast geographical areas. Dead Hand must simultaneously process information from seismic sensors, radiation detectors, communication monitoring equipment, and early warning satellites while determining which data sources are reliable and which might be malfunctioning. Conflicting sensor readings create scenarios where some systems indicate nuclear attack while others suggest normal conditions. Computer algorithms must decide whether to trust sensors reporting nuclear, explosions, or sensors showing no unusual activity. The system could conclude that sensor failures themselves indicate enemy attempts to blind Russian early warning capabilities before launching nuclear attacks. Software bugs and hardware failures present possibilities for accidental activation of automated nuclear response systems. Computer programs contain millions of lines of code that can interact in unexpected ways to produce erroneous outputs even when individual components function correctly. Memory chips can develop bit errors that alter stored data or program instructions, causing systems to operate differently than designers intended. Power supply fluctuations can cause temporary malfunctions that corrupt ongoing calculations or trigger unintended system responses. Network hardware failures could isolate Dead Hand from normal communication channels, creating conditions the system interprets as evidence of nuclear attack rather than technical problems. Space weather events create natural phenomena that can overwhelm sensors and communication systems with false signals mimicking nuclear attacks. Solar flares produce electromagnetic radiation that can disable satellites, disrupt radio communications, and create electrical surges in ground-based equipment. Geomagnetic storms cause fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field that interfere with radar systems and communication networks. High-energy particles from solar storms can cause computer systems to malfunction or restart unexpectedly. Satellite malfunctions resulting from space weather could eliminate early warning capabilities or cause sensors to transmit incorrect data about potential threats. Dead Hand must distinguish between space weather effects and genuine nuclear attacks while operating with potentially degraded sensor networks and communication systems. Cyber attacks represent modern threats that Soviet engineers never anticipated when designing automated nuclear response systems. Foreign intelligence services could potentially penetrate computer networks and introduce malware designed to trigger false alarms or corrupt threat assessment algorithms. Advanced persistent threats sponsored by hostile nations possess capabilities to maintain long-term access to sensitive computer systems while remaining undetected for months or years. Cyber weapons could alter sensor data, disrupt communication networks, or modify software algorithms that determine when nuclear retaliation is warranted. Enemy hackers might attempt to trigger automated nuclear responses by creating false electronic signatures that mimic nuclear attacks. The compressed timelines that make automated systems necessary also eliminate opportunities for human verification of machine decisions. Dead Hand could potentially authorize nuclear retaliation based on false alarm conditions before human operators realize that technical problems rather than enemy attacks created threatening data. Automated systems cannot pause to gather additional information or consult human operators when sensor data suggests nuclear attacks are underway. Computer algorithms must reach definitive conclusions about nuclear threats based on whatever information is immediately available, regardless of data quality or reliability. Every day that Dead Hand remains operational represents another opportunity for technical failures, sensor malfunctions, or data interpretation errors to trigger nuclear retaliation against non-existent threats. The system has never been tested under actual nuclear attack conditions, yet it continues monitoring global military activities with the authority to end human civilization based on computer calculations that could be fundamentally wrong. This creates a paradox that strikes the Doomsday at the heart of nuclear strategy. Mathematical models attempt to calculate whether Dead Hand makes nuclear war more likely or actually prevents the catastrophe it was designed to unleash. This question torments nuclear strategists because the answer determines whether humanity has built the ultimate safeguard or engineered its own destruction. The system embodies a fundamental contradiction that challenges every assumption about nuclear deterrence. Dead Hand was specifically designed to prevent nuclear war by making nuclear war absolutely certain under specific conditions. The logic seems counterintuitive until you understand that nuclear deterrence only works when potential aggressors believe beyond doubt that attacking will result in their own annihilation. The mathematical certainty transforms the psychology of nuclear confrontation in ways that traditional deterrence cannot achieve. Conventional deterrence relies on threats that leaders might not actually execute when faced with the ultimate decision to end human civilization. Political leaders throughout history have stepped back from nuclear precipices because human psychology rebels against ordering mass destruction. The Cuban Missile Crisis ended peacefully partly because both Kennedy and Khrushchev retained enough rationality to avoid nuclear war despite enormous political and military pressure. Dead Hand eliminates this safety mechanism by removing human hesitation from nuclear retaliation. The system guarantees that nuclear aggression will trigger automatic response regardless of whether human leaders possess the will to authorize civilization-ending retaliation. Nuclear strategy experts remain fundamentally divided about whether automated systems stabilize or destabilize global nuclear deterrence. Proponents argue that Dead Hand represents the logical evolution of mutually assured destruction doctrine by closing vulnerabilities that potential aggressors might exploit. They contend that deterrence only functions when retaliation is absolutely guaranteed, and that human decision-making introduces uncertainties that undermine deterrent effects. These experts point to historical examples where leaders hesitated during nuclear crises and suggest that such hesitation encourages enemies to test nuclear boundaries. Automated systems eliminate doubt about nuclear retaliation by making response mathematically certain rather than dependent on human psychology. Critics warn that automated nuclear systems create new pathways to accidental nuclear war that could trigger global destruction through technical failures rather than deliberate aggression. They argue that human judgment provides essential safeguards against false alarms, equipment malfunctions, and misinterpreted intelligence that could cause automated systems to launch nuclear weapons against non-existent threats. These analysts worry that removing human oversight from nuclear decisions creates systems that are too sensitive to technical problems and too inflexible to recognize unusual circumstances requiring careful analysis rather than immediate retaliation. They suggest that automated nuclear systems might actually increase nuclear war probability by eliminating human wisdom and adaptability from life-or-death decisions. The psychological effects of knowing that automated nuclear systems exist create subtle but profound changes in how world leaders approach international crises and military planning. American presidents must consider the possibility that conventional military actions could trigger automated Russian nuclear responses through algorithms they cannot predict or control. NATO military planners face the challenge of designing strategies that account for automated systems that might interpret routine military exercises as preparation for nuclear attack. The knowledge that machines rather than humans might determine nuclear retaliation adds new layers of uncertainty to crisis management and diplomatic negotiations. Dead Hand fundamentally alters strategic calculations for both potential aggressors and defenders by introducing mathematical certainty into nuclear deterrence equations. Potential aggressors can no longer assume that enemy leaders might hesitate or seek negotiated solutions during nuclear confrontations. The system guarantees that nuclear attacks will trigger automatic retaliation regardless of political circumstances, diplomatic initiatives, or human emotional responses. This certainty could potentially strengthen deterrence by eliminating scenarios where aggressors might gamble that enemy leaders lack the resolve to authorize nuclear retaliation. However, the same certainty could destabilize crises by eliminating opportunities for face-saving compromises or graduated responses that allow conflicts to de-escalate before reaching nuclear thresholds. Game theory analysis reveals both stabilizing and destabilizing aspects of automated nuclear response systems that resist simple evaluation. The mathematical certainty of retaliation should theoretically strengthen deterrence by eliminating uncertainty about enemy responses to nuclear aggression. Rational actors would avoid actions that guarantee their own destruction regardless of potential benefits. However, automated systems also eliminate the flexibility and unpredictability that can prevent conflicts from escalating to nuclear levels. Human leaders can make unexpected decisions, offer surprising concessions, or find creative solutions that automated systems cannot recognize or implement. The removal of human unpredictability might actually make nuclear conflicts more likely by creating rigid response patterns that enemies can predict and potentially exploit. Removing human emotion and hesitation from nuclear decisions presents both advantages and risks that challenge traditional assumptions about nuclear command and control. Human emotions can prevent rational strategic decisions during crises when fear, anger, or pride influence nuclear choices. Automated systems make decisions based on programmed logic rather than psychological pressures that might cause human leaders to make poor choices during extreme stress. However, human emotions and moral considerations also provide essential checks against unnecessary nuclear escalation. Human leaders might recognize moral boundaries or political solutions that automated systems cannot comprehend or value appropriately. Dead Hand may have already prevented conflicts through invisible deterrent effects that never appear in historical records. The system's existence could have discouraged military actions that might have escalated to nuclear levels if potential aggressors believed they could survive through successful decapitation strikes. American presidents might have chosen more cautious approaches to international crises because they recognized that automated Soviet systems could trigger nuclear war through misinterpretation rather than deliberate escalation. The ultimate question of whether Dead Hand represents humanity's salvation or doom may depend on factors beyond human prediction or control. The system's effect on nuclear stability could vary depending on international circumstances, technological developments, or random events that its designers never anticipated. The proliferation of similar systems among multiple nuclear powers could create interaction effects that no single nation can predict or manage. The answer may ultimately depend on variables that operate beyond human understanding, making humanity's survival dependent on calculations that transcend conventional strategic analysis. The strategic implications of these systems extend far beyond current geopolitical tensions into fundamental questions about human survival in the nuclear age. Dead Hand represents humanity's ultimate paradox, a machine built to preserve human life by threatening to end it. We created systems too dangerous to use, but apparently too valuable to abandon. The automated nuclear response system embodies the twisted logic of nuclear deterrence taken to its absolute extreme. Engineers design computers to guarantee human survival by programming them to destroy human civilization. The system operates every day as both humanity's potential savior and its possible executioner. Future generations will either thank us for building the ultimate deterrent that prevented nuclear war, or curse us for gambling their survival on machines programmed to end the world.